In the quiet, unassuming town of Bonaparte, Iowa, a family of 5 was nestled in their home on a crisp October night. The Bentlers, known for their close bonds and small-town kindness, seemed like the kind of family you'd see in a picture frame on a mantel: a father who worked tirelessly to provide, a mother who nurtured with unshakable love, and 3 bright young daughters full of dreams. Their home stood as a symbol of comfort and stability, the kind of place where nothing bad could ever happen. But as the hours stretched past midnight, a harrowing series of events unfolded within those very walls. A call to 911 shattered the stillness of the night. A young voice, trembling and breathless, whispered words that would forever haunt those who heard them. Moments later, silence took over, a silence that left behind questions far louder than any answer could provide. By morning, Bonaparte would wake to a horror so unimaginable, it defied everything they believed about their neighbors, their friends, their family. The truth? It wasn't a stranger who brought terror to the Bentler household that night. It was someone they trusted, someone they loved. And the reason? That was perhaps the most chilling part of all. As investigators arrived at the Bentler home, they uncovered a crime scene that defied explanation: a mother and father, along with their 3 daughters, brutally murdered in cold blood. And at the center of it all was their oldest son, Shawn Bentler, whose actions that night would reveal a darkness no one had ever imagined. But what led Shawn to commit such an unthinkable act? And how could the facade of a picture-perfect family mask such devastating secrets? If you stand against violence of any kind and support spreading awareness, please hit the subscribe button to join our community. Together, we can shine a light on the stories that matter. Bonaparte, Iowa, is the kind of place where everyone knows each other. A town of just over 400 people, it's a community where doors are rarely locked, and neighbors greet one another with a wave. At its center stood the Bentler family, a symbol of stability and success in a world that often seemed unpredictable. Michael and Sandra Bentler were pillars of their community. Michael, a hardworking businessman, had built a thriving lumber company from the ground up. Known for his unshakable work ethic and quiet strength, he was the type of man who believed in earning everything with integrity. Sandra, his wife of more than 2 decades, was the heart of the family. Warm, compassionate, and deeply devoted to her children, she made their house a home in every sense of the word. Together, they raised 3 daughters, Sheena, Shelby, and Shane. Bright, ambitious, and deeply loved, the girls were the pride of the Bentler family. Sheena, the eldest, was in high school, known for her kindness and determination. Shelby and Shane, still in their early teens, were described as inseparable, 2 halves of a whole, always laughing and sharing dreams of the future. And then there was Shawn, the eldest child, and the only son. At 25, Shawn had moved away from Bonaparte, seeking a life of independence. But his relationship with his family wasn't without its struggles. Beneath the surface of their seemingly idyllic dynamic, cracks had begun to form. Cracks that would later reveal themselves as fractures too wide to mend. Shawn had always been different from his sisters. Where they thrived in the safety of their family unit, Shawn seemed restless, constantly seeking more. He left home in his early 20s, attempting to carve out a life of his own. But his ventures were marked by financial struggles, a series of failed relationships, and mounting tension with his parents. To the outside world, Shawn's struggles might have seemed ordinary, a young man trying to find his way. But for those closest to him, there were signs of something deeper, something harder to define. Arguments with his father had become more frequent, and his relationship with his mother was strained. While his parents tried to help him, Shawn often saw their guidance as control, their support as judgment. Neighbors recalled how Michael often spoke with pride about his daughters but rarely mentioned Shawn. And though Sandra loved her son deeply, there was a growing sense that Shawn resented his place within the family. The family business, the inheritance, the expectations, Shawn felt they were slipping away from him, leaving him as little more than an afterthought in a family that seemed to thrive without him. In the months leading up to the tragedy, Shawn's visits home became increasingly rare, and when they did happen, they were often marked by tension. One neighbor would later recall overhearing a heated argument between Michael and Shawn, the kind of argument that lingered in the air long after the shouting stopped. No one could have known then that those tensions would come to a head in the most devastating way possible. The months before October 14, 2006, seemed uneventful on the surface. The Bentler family carried on as they always had. Michael and Sandra focused on their business, their daughters immersed in school and social activities, and Shawn largely absent, living hours away. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, cracks were widening, and a storm was building that no one could see coming. Shawn's life had begun to unravel in ways that even he couldn't control. Financial troubles mounted as his attempts to start a business floundered. Debt collectors called relentlessly, and the weight of his failures loomed over him. His resentment toward his family deepened, fueled by feelings of inadequacy and bitterness. To Shawn, it seemed like his family was thriving while he was drowning. The Bentler family, unaware of the depths of Shawn's turmoil, continued to offer him support. Michael, ever the pragmatist, suggested Shawn take a job with the family business to stabilize his finances. But Shawn saw this as an insult, a step backward, a concession that he had failed. The tension between father and son grew sharper with each interaction, their conversations escalating from terse disagreements to explosive arguments. In the weeks leading up to the murders, Shawn's behavior became increasingly erratic. He began reaching out to friends, venting about his frustrations with his parents and hinting at the financial strain he was under. One friend would later recall Shawn's chilling words, "They think they're untouchable, but everyone has a breaking point." Shawn also made veiled comments about his family's wealth. He spoke of the inheritance he believed he was entitled to, the business he felt was rightfully his. His words, while vague at the time, would later take on a much darker meaning. Sandra, always the mediator in the family, tried to smooth things over, urging Shawn to come home for a family dinner to discuss his troubles. But Shawn declined, choosing instead to isolate himself further. His sisters, unaware of the growing tension, continued to see their brother as distant but harmless. They had no idea what he was capable of. In the days before the murders, Shawn's financial situation reached a critical point. His debts were piling up, and his options were dwindling. Desperation began to cloud his judgment, and his resentment toward his family festered into something far more dangerous. On the evening of October 13, 2006, Shawn drove the 2 hours from his home to the Bentler family residence. It wasn't a planned visit. There was no call ahead, no indication to his family that he was coming. But Shawn knew exactly why he was making the trip. What happened next would forever alter the lives of everyone in Bonaparte, Iowa. It was a decision born out of greed, desperation, and a darkness that had taken root long ago, a decision that would leave an entire town grappling with the unimaginable. It was the early hours of October 14, 2006, when the unthinkable happened. The Bentler family home, a symbol of love and security, became the setting of an unimaginable nightmare. What unfolded that night wasn't just the loss of life, it was the shattering of trust, the obliteration of innocence, and the birth of questions that would never fully be answered. Shawn arrived at the Bentler residence shortly after midnight. The house was dark, its occupants asleep. For a moment, Shawn hesitated, sitting in his car with the engine idling. But whatever conflict may have played in his mind was quickly silenced. He grabbed the weapon he'd brought with him, a shotgun, and walked toward the home he had once called his own. The sound of the front door creaking open was the first sign that something was wrong. Sandra, hearing the noise, was the first to wake. She moved toward the hallway, calling out softly, "Shawn? Is that you?" What happened next was nothing short of horrifying. Shawn confronted his mother in the hallway. The argument that followed was muffled, heated, but it didn't last long. A gunshot echoed through the house, its deafening blast waking Michael and the girls. Sandra Bentler was the first victim, shot at close range by her own son. Michael rushed from the bedroom, yelling Shawn's name, but he was met with the same fate. In the chaos, the girls, Sheena, Shelby, and Shane, tried to hide, their young voices trembling as they whispered to one another, trying to make sense of the terror unfolding around them. At some point during the rampage, one of the girls managed to dial 911. Her voice, barely audible over the sounds of chaos, gave a glimpse into the horror of that moment. "He's going to kill us," she whispered before the line went silent. The call would later become one of the most harrowing pieces of evidence in the case. Room by room, Shawn sought out his sisters. Sheena, the eldest, pleaded with her brother to stop, her voice breaking under the weight of fear. Shelby and Shane huddled together in their bedroom, holding each other tightly, hoping the nightmare would pass. But Shawn was relentless, his actions methodical and cold. By the time it was over, all 5 members of the Bentler family lay dead. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, was now eerily quiet, the air heavy with the smell of gunpowder and death. Shawn left the house as quickly as he had arrived, his footsteps fading into the darkness. The first responders arrived shortly after the 911 call. What they found inside the Bentler home was a scene of unimaginable carnage. Sandra and Michael lay near the entrance, while the bodies of Sheena, Shelby, and Shane were discovered in their bedrooms. The small town of Bonaparte would wake that morning to sirens and flashing lights, the news spreading like wildfire. A family, beloved and respected, was gone. But even as the community mourned, investigators began piecing together the events of the night. It didn't take long for their focus to shift to Shawn, the only member of the family unaccounted for. If you know you do not support violence of any kind and support spreading awareness, please hit the subscribe button to join our community. Together, we can shine a light on the stories that matter. As dawn broke over Bonaparte, the town was gripped by an icy sense of disbelief. News spread like wildfire, a family was slaughtered in their own home, and the killer was none other than Shawn Bentler, the oldest son. But what could have driven him to commit such a heinous act? Investigators were left with no answers, only the grisly scene that awaited them in the Bentler house. The 911 call from one of the girls had given authorities a vital clue: Shawn was still out there. The dispatcher had heard just enough to make the connection, and by the time the police arrived at the crime scene, they had already begun a search for Shawn. They scoured the town, knocking on doors, asking questions, trying to make sense of the carnage that had just unfolded. At first, there was confusion. No one could fathom why Shawn, a son and brother, would turn on his own family. Some of the neighbors described him as troubled, others as just a young man struggling to find his way. But no one expected violence, not like this. The search for Shawn took several hours. Police spoke with friends, family members, and anyone who might have seen him in the hours following the killings. It didn't take long for authorities to piece together a chilling portrait of Shawn's movements that night. He had been seen leaving a nearby convenience store late into the night, his appearance unusual for someone who was supposed to be visiting family. He was described as acting oddly, almost as if he were in a daze, though no one suspected the true horror of what had already taken place. Meanwhile, Shawn had fled the area, leaving Bonaparte behind as he drove toward nearby towns, avoiding any detection. Police issued an alert for his arrest, but still, no one knew where he was. His whereabouts remained a mystery for nearly 2 days. It wasn't until October 16, 2006, that a break in the case would come. Shawn had managed to evade authorities for 2 days, but his fear and desperation led him to make a mistake. He made a phone call, an unexpected, unguarded phone call to a family member. The details of the conversation remain unclear, but the phone call was enough for the police to track his location. Authorities found Shawn in a remote area outside of Keosauqua, Iowa. He was alone, disheveled, and visibly shaken. When officers apprehended him, he made no attempt to flee. There was no resistance, only silence. Shawn was arrested and taken into custody without incident, his once thriving life now reduced to a broken man under the weight of his actions. During the interrogation, Shawn was quiet at first. He sat across from the detectives, his head down, his eyes avoiding direct contact. But as the hours wore on, the pressure of the situation finally took its toll. He broke down, confessing to the murders in a calm, detached manner, as if he were recounting a story from someone else's life. Shawn explained that the night had started like any other. But when he arrived at the family home, something snapped. The argument with his father over the family business had escalated to the point where Shawn felt as though he had no way out. "I didn't think I had a choice," he said in his confession. "I thought if I didn't do something, I would lose everything." His words were chilling, not just for their content, but for the coldness with which he delivered them. Shawn never expressed regret. No remorse. Just a quiet acknowledgement of what he had done and why he had done it, a man convinced that his fate was sealed long before the bloodshed began. As the news of Shawn's arrest spread, the town of Bonaparte was left to grapple with the aftermath. Friends, neighbors, and even distant relatives were left in shock, unable to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the horrific actions he had committed. The community mourned the loss of the Bentler family, but the grief was compounded by the overwhelming sense of betrayal. Shawn's family had been known for their kindness and generosity, yet it was their own flesh and blood who had destroyed them. How could someone so close to them commit such a monstrous act? How could a son turn on his parents, his sisters, in such a brutal way? As the weeks passed, the reality of the crime began to settle in. Bonaparte, Iowa, a town once untouched by the horrors of such violence, found itself at the center of a media storm. The world watched as the story of Shawn Bentler, the man who killed his entire family, unfolded in court. What had once seemed like an unthinkable tragedy now became a legal battle, one that would reveal more about Shawn's motivations, and perhaps more about the darkness lurking inside him, than anyone could have imagined. Shawn Bentler was charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder, the brutal slaying of his mother, father, and 3 sisters. His trial, which began in early 2007, drew intense media coverage, as people across the country tried to make sense of a crime that seemed so incomprehensible. The case was complex from the very beginning. Shawn's defense attorneys faced an uphill battle. While there was no doubt about Shawn's involvement in the murders, the question of his mental state at the time of the killings became a central issue. Was he legally insane? Did he have the capacity to understand the gravity of his actions, or was he so consumed by his internal turmoil that he could not be held fully accountable? The prosecution argued that Shawn was fully aware of what he was doing, that his actions were premeditated and calculated. They pointed to the confession he gave to authorities, the lack of remorse, and the manner in which he carefully planned the murders in the days leading up to October 14. The defense, on the other hand, sought to portray Shawn as a man driven to madness by financial desperation and strained family relationships, unable to see the line between right and wrong. During the trial, experts were called to testify on Shawn's mental state. Some argued that Shawn's troubled history, his struggles with debt, his fractured relationship with his family, and his feelings of inadequacy, had driven him to a breaking point. Others pointed to his behavior in the aftermath of the crime, his lack of remorse, and his calm demeanor during his confession, which they argued suggested he had been fully aware of what he was doing. Psychologists and psychiatrists debated whether Shawn's actions could be attributed to a form of psychosis or if he had simply acted out of rage and greed. But one thing became clear: Shawn was not a person consumed by some uncontrollable madness. Rather, he was a man who made a calculated decision, one rooted in a complex mix of emotions, resentments, and self-preservation. This was not a case of a mind lost in a fog of insanity, it was the result of a decision made with chilling clarity. The prosecution presented a damning array of evidence. In addition to Shawn's confession, which was played for the jury in its entirety, investigators presented forensic evidence from the crime scene. Blood spatter patterns, shell casings, and the autopsies of the victims all corroborated the timeline of events Shawn had described. The fact that he had brought a weapon with him to the family home, carefully planned his actions, and then fled without hesitation made it clear, this was not a crime of passion. This was cold, premeditated murder. The emotional toll of the trial was felt by everyone who had known the Bentler family. Friends, extended family members, and even members of the community took the stand, speaking about the family's kindness, their generosity, and the shock they felt upon learning the identity of the killer. It was painful for them to testify, but it was also an important part of the case. One of Sandra's closest friends spoke of how Sandra had always gone out of her way to support Shawn, even when he seemed distant or frustrated with the family. She loved him, the friend said through tears. She would have done anything for him. The pain of hearing those words in the context of such a tragic loss was felt deeply in the courtroom. But the most heart-wrenching testimony came from those who had known Shawn as a boy. They described him as someone who had once been full of promise, a young man with a bright future ahead of him. The question everyone seemed to be asking was, what went wrong? How did the boy they once knew become capable of such violence? Throughout the trial, Shawn sat quietly in the defendant's chair, his expression often unreadable. When it came time for him to testify, he offered little in the way of explanation. His defense team had hoped he would show remorse or offer an apology, but Shawn remained detached. In a brief statement from the stand, he expressed that he regretted the pain his actions had caused to others, but he never directly apologized to the victims or their families. His words, cold and lacking emotion, failed to provide any sense of closure for those who had been left behind. He simply repeated, "I didn't think I had any other choice." After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just under 3 days. On April 17, 2007, Shawn Bentler was found guilty of 5 counts of first-degree murder. The jury's decision was unanimous. There was no question that Shawn had planned and executed the murders in cold blood. As the verdict was read, Shawn showed little reaction. There were no tears, no signs of relief, just the same empty expression that had marked his demeanor throughout the trial. The families of the victims, on the other hand, were overcome with emotion. It was a bittersweet moment. Justice had been served, but it could never undo the damage that had been done. Shawn Bentler was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms in prison without the possibility of parole. His fate was sealed, but the scars left behind by his actions would never fully heal. For the community of Bonaparte, Iowa, the story of the Bentler family would remain a haunting reminder of how quickly everything can change, how the ties that bind can unravel in an instant, and how the darkness within a person can sometimes be impossible to see until it's too late. His calm detachment, both during the killings and in the aftermath, only added to the confusion. Could the violence have been prevented? Could anyone have seen the signs? And ultimately, what does it say about the capacity for evil that can lurk even in the most familiar of faces? Today, Shawn Bentler is serving his life sentence at the Iowa State Penitentiary. He is 40 years old. His name is no longer tied to the boy who grew up in Bonaparte, but to the man who brutally murdered his entire family. In prison, Shawn has kept a low profile. He has shown no indication that he is seeking rehabilitation or expressing remorse for his actions. As far as anyone knows, he has not made any effort to reach out to the families of his victims or to offer an explanation for his violence. In many ways, Shawn has become a symbol of a tragedy too horrific to understand. A reminder of how fragile life can be, how quickly a person can transform from someone you know into a stranger capable of unspeakable violence. The legacy of Sandra, Michael, and their children lives on in the memories of those who loved them, even as their story became one of horror and heartbreak. The Bentler family will always be remembered as victims, but they were also people full of love, ambition, and potential. The question remains, how can we stop the darkness before it takes hold? The story of Shawn Bentler is far from just a tale of one man's horrific crime. It is a reminder that the capacity for violence can lie within anyone, even those we think we know. And perhaps, in that stark realization, lies the true horror of this story. If you've been affected by this story or similar cases, remember, violence can be prevented with awareness and understanding. Look out for those around you. Listen, observe, and never ignore the signs of pain. And if you or someone you know is struggling, don't hesitate to reach out for help. No one should ever have to face their demons alone. What do you think drove Shawn Bentler to commit such a horrific crime? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to hear more true crime stories, hit that like button and subscribe. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who might be interested. Thank you for watching, and stay safe.